Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita. Many are the pathways to truth. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it and your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. On the dedication page of Swami Kriyananda's book, The Path, appears the following account. A group of Paramahansa Yogananda's disciples had gone with him to see a movie about the life of Gyandev, a great saint of medieval India. Afterwards, they gathered and listened to the master explain certain subtler aspects to that inspiring story. A young man in the group mentioned another film he had seen years earlier in India about the life of Mirabai, a famous woman saint. "If you'd seen that movie," he exclaimed, "you wouldn't have even liked this movie." The guru rebuked him. "Why make such comparisons? The lives of great saints manifest in various ways the same, one God." The Bible contains a similar account in the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 9. And John said, "Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and we forbade him, because he followeth not with us." And Jesus said unto him, "Forbid him not, for he that is not against us is for us." The more central a truth, the greater the number of contexts in which it can be applied. Truth is like a pure white light, containing within itself a full spectrum of the rainbow. Let no one tell you that your path to God ought to be, what your path to God ought to be. Many are the paths. Select your own according to the dictates of your own nature, no matter how out of step that puts you with other people. Sri Krishna in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita states, "Trying even unsuccessfully to fulfill one's own spiritual duty, dharma, is better than pursuing successfully the duties of others. Better death itself in the pursuance of one's own duties. The pursuance of another's duties is fraught with spiritual danger." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Morning, everyone. The beautiful flowers you see here today are the benefit or the result of last night's annual Kriya initiation. Kriya Yoga is the essential technique of meditation that our Guru Paramahansa Yogananda has made not just famous but popular in the West since his lifetime. And so it's a very sacred ceremony that we do, and many of you here today were there as well. I occasionally get these little things from my brother-in-law in Europe, her brother, and he's a bit of an amateur philosopher of sorts, and so he zipped me something quite early this morning, and he said to me, okay, let me get this right. He said, "You know, we used to think the world was an illusion, and now it only seems to be." I share that witty gem because in a few days I'm going to have to see him and talk this sort of nonsense with him. So I'm sort of getting my mind wrapped around these Zen-like koans that he's constantly throwing out there to try to test my intelligence, which isn't very much of a test, but I have to sort of act like I'm bright. So Anyway, you know, our theme, our topic today is many are the pathways to truth. But in a gathering like this, it's like preaching to the choir. I mean, we're not the ones on this planet who have a problem with that. And yet in a few days, many of us, about, I don't know, 15, 17 of us, will be in Italy touring the beautiful shrines, or I should say the sacred shrines of St. Francis and other saints, and the beautiful art and architecture, which essentially were inspired, enabled, if you will, by that vision and that power of sanctity of those many saints. I mean, you can't go into a village in Italy and not stumble on the remains of some saint, incorruptible or otherwise. I mean, they're practically in your way. It's really extraordinary. It's also true in a different way in India, but it is a fact that in Italy there is this power there and this sanctity that is so strongly felt. And yet when I and many of us, I think, going have been trying to tune into the shrines where we will go and the lives of these people, especially St. Francis, obviously. You know, you think, well, gee, could I live like that? You know, begging for food and sort of preaching on the corner in the piazzas and going from town to town as Jesus described for his disciples with nothing. I mean, you know, just a cloak basically and maybe sandals perhaps. I don't know that that's really our way of life. And so the paths to truth take many, many outward forms. I mean, look what God has done for all of us here in this room with 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, and so forth. It's really quite incredible. And so when we speak that way, we're speaking about the outer forms, even the more subtle and more central outer forms, which is to say our temperaments, some of us being more devotional, some of us more intellectual, some of us more serving and giving and so forth. These two, though more central to our consciousness, are nonetheless peripheral to our soul. And so I want to turn the topic around a little bit in honor of the path of Kriya, in honor of the great blessing and the light of yoga, which is encircling this globe. You know, coming out of the Middle Ages, particularly mostly represented, I think, by Protestantism and its revolt from the medieval forms of what then later became, by contrast, Catholicism. But much of the Western form of spirituality, with the urge to be practical, with the Industrial Revolution, is focused on, you know, the practical applications of spirituality, less so on how many angels fit on a pin of a needle or something. And so we do a lot of humanitarian things and this kind of outward social service, and it's all perfectly fine. We see in India, for example, with its great spirituality, needing to go through being practical to, unfortunately, in many ways, become more materialistic. But Yogananda and others, great teachers from and in India, recognize that this is something they simply have to go through in order to balance East and West, materialism with spirituality. This age is an age of balance. And yet it's interesting because we say the paths to truth are many, but in fact the teaching of yoga, in a sense, is that there's only one path. The forms of that path are many, just as we vary greatly in racial characteristics and gender and all sorts of personality things, absolutely, like every snowflake. But the essential path to truth, as we say every Sunday, truth is one and eternal. What else do we say?
Realize oneness with
Realize with oneness with it.
in your deathless
in
self.
your deathless, yeah, like I was saying. And so one book that you never hear from, but has always been greatly inspirational to me personally, being kind of an egghead of sorts, but actually it's more than that, because it's probably the most beloved poem on the planet, which is the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And this beautiful, poem, or whatever it is, inspires at least it did inspire in people who first came upon it, thought that it was a hedonistic, paean, if you will, to love and wine and this sort of thing. But in the Sufi and Islamic tradition generally, because certain things are prohibited from being represented, these God in the form of the lover, the beloved, you think of Rumi and his poetry, for example, which is so popular today, is one of the characteristic expressions of that particular path. And Omar Khayyam, Yogananda said, was a true master. He was one of the early great Sufi masters. And so the normal interpretation of the Rubaiyat is often completely misguided. And in the East, when people hear Westerners' interpretation of a bread of wine, a loaf of bread, a jug of wine, and thou, or that sort of thing, they just sort of chuckle under their breath. I guess it's clear to them that it's all allegorical. But I wanted to read a little bit. I rarely read at these occasions. I don't myself even like being read to, but I admit it. But this is just so beautiful. It fits so perfectly. This is the quatrain. Up from earth's center, through the seventh gate I rose, and on the throne of Saturn sate, and many knots unraveled by the road, but not the knot of human death and fate. And then in Yogananda's paraphrase of this, through 7 gates I passed on my long journey toward God. At the last of them, the mighty cranial light, I paused a while to view the road behind and before. Many victories I had won along the way. Many profound insights had I gained. I had banished satanic ignorance from the kingdom of my consciousness. I no longer lived under the sway of physical desire. And yet, I found myself even now not completely free from the influence of karmic law. Then he goes on in the expanded meaning. This is Kriyananda, who took Yogananda's interpretations and commentaries, did some editing, and then expanded on their meaning. He describes that which I won't have time to do, but most of you know, the teaching of yoga, that this physical form is animated by a prototypical body, the astral body, and it is connected to the physical body through the doorways of the chakras. And so later he writes, after explaining all the 7 chakras and so forth, he writes the nerves are channels through which the life force enables the mind and body to interact in this world. As the life force moves down the spine and out to the body and senses, the mind is drawn outward also. Sense stimulation from within impels one to seek fulfillment in sense pleasures. However, this same nervous system constitutes the one and only path to spiritual enlightenment, regardless of formal outward religious affiliation. When the energy can be coaxed to reverse its flow from the senses to the brain, it reveals to our consciousness another world. This stimulation from within awakens the desire for self-realization. And with progressive interiorization, daily meditation, one develops subtle inner perceptions vastly more satisfying than their muted echoes from the senses without. And so we have here, epitomized by Kriya, which is in itself an ancient teaching, though lost in the material ages, a revelation, an eternal revelation that was found by the Christian mystics, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Francis, all of the great mystics in Christianity, though not schooled in the art and science of yoga, of life force internalization and so forth. They were bereft of the benefit of the science of it. Nonetheless, through devotion and prayer, service and ego transcendence, the life force internalized, deep and silent prayer. I love the story about Teresa of Avila, who was so misguided by her confessors when she would talk about silent prayer and being uplifted and beyond words. They didn't think that was the right way to go. And she said she spent many years being, just not getting where she ultimately got. in the Spirit of God, in the mystical union with the Christ, the infinite Christ. Not only did she have visions of Jesus as a Christ, but she entered the formless state of the universal Christ in all creation. And so we have the gift in this scientific age of what Padma quoted last night at the Kriya initiation, and as we say every Sunday here in the Festival of Light, even a little practice of this inward, quote, religion will save us from dire fears and colossal sufferings. I saw this little clip thing the other day. You know, the world seems like it's going crazy. You know, we have all these terrible things happening everywhere. The fact is, it's never been any different. But, okay, so it's going crazy in new forms, okay? And so I saw this little cartoon thing. This guy is sitting in front of the TV, and the announcer is saying, "How do we deal with the fear of terrorism?" Next scene, click. This is God's show. This is God's world. And whatever duties and responsibility he has given to you, it is, as Gandhi said so famously, now we need to be the change that we seek. If we can be peaceful and harmonious with our family members, our co-workers, the world around us, if we can relate responsibly, harmoniously, and so forth, this is our great contribution. Probably nobody in this room has responsibility for the war in Syria and Iraq or the Middle East and on and on and on, for containing Ebola and so forth. Maybe we can do a little something, but we can certainly be the change that we seek. In this age, there will be no security. Yogananda spoke of, he didn't use the word terrorists, but he called them international criminals. And he advised that there be an international police force, interestingly enough. He was part of the forming of the United Nations in the late 40s in San Francisco. And he foresaw the great insecurities, including plagues and natural. He says, you don't know what a cataclysm is coming. He talked about the suffering of the United States, economically especially, about wars throughout the world, World War III and IV. And this is not an age of, we have no idea what is probably coming in the decades, centuries to come, as all the institutions are essentially destroyed one by one because of a good thing, the empowerment of the individual, represented so well, although it's good, bad, and indifferent, by the internet, bringing into our hands a great deal of knowledge and ignorance and delusion, but to the individual. And it is no coincidence that Kriya Yoga, which is to say the knowledge of the life force within ourselves and how to contact that inner castle of peace, to magnetize our aura, that we can live in the light and be a light bearer to others, which is so greatly need, to form communities, residential or virtual, whereby people, the great, in the past history, we were separated, of course, by continents, but by races and religions. Well, that's all, like alphabet soup now. It's all stirred up together. Every neighborhood, every city on the face of the earth has everybody in it. So what will take place? New communities will form, which is to say people of like mind, consciousness will make the stratification of the races. And those who seek to be Brahmins, those who seek to be one with God, seek to be in tune at least with God, through this inner practice, which will save us from dire fears and colossal sufferings, coming together as we do even here and as Ananda does around the world, and enterprises like our farm, like East West, the school, the thrift store. These are simple, these are insignificant now. We're forming a lending pool where people can invest their savings and help some of these businesses to grow or to new ones to start, to fund the fellowship hall and so forth. People coming together with high ideals, bringing their resources and talents and skills and goodwill, can change their lives, and bit by bit, by example, not merely by preaching, pardon me, can change the course of history. Jesus and his band of 12, Paramahansa Yogananda and the few brothers and sister disciples he had there at Mount Washington. The light of Kriya is spreading throughout the world. It is a revolution, and we can't possibly see the extent of it. And it doesn't much matter, because when we go home, it's up to us to go within, to still the body, to still the mind. We don't even meditate until the thoughts stop. We all know how difficult that is. And the science of pranayama, the science of breath control, which leads to energy control, which leads to mind control in the positive sense of that word, which leads to the awakening of the soul, which can then shine when all the turbulence of our five senses and emotions and so forth can subside into the clear light of the, as Padma said earlier, the kutastha, the spiritual eye of awakening. This is a great gift we've been given. And Ananda represents a revolution. It's not the only one by any means, but a revolution is taking place in this world. And in that sense, then, there really is only one path to awakening, to awaken our consciousness, to purify it. And that one path is driven by the simple fact of how we were made. Just like science says, look at the universe, the wonders of it, the grandness of it. Well, the grandness of our consciousness is not in these individual half-baked bodies and these half-broken personalities of ours. Our greatness lies in our soul, which is eternal, changeless, cannot be broken. It is perfect. It is eternal. What an affirmation. What a revolution in consciousness. And we can do that every day. Keep our appointment with God. To be still, as the Old Testament said, and know. The truth teachings are in all the traditions. It's just the outer aspects of it that seem to differ so much. So we are privileged. I think we can't appreciate really fully how privileged we are to be drawn to such a precept, and yet to have the opportunity, difficult though it be, to practice these precepts so that we begin to realize them. In this day of Kriya celebration, I think the masters, through God, they have been sent by God, are joyful, are hopeful. Hope for a better world is what we need today.